Dear students, this module on chemical shift in NMR is a continuation of my previous modules, and if you have not seen my previous module, I suggest you to go through once again and carefully go through the video content and then watch this particular video presentation on chemical shift in NMR, because certain points which I have discussed in the previous module are actually necessary to understand the chemical shift concept in NMR. So this module basically we shall discuss what is chemical shift, what is the origin for chemical shift, how chemical shift is measured by using NMR spectrometer, what are the internal standards used in NMR spectrometry, what are the units of chemical shift, and briefly we shall also discuss what is continuous wave and pulsed Fourier transform NMR techniques. Let us consider we have ethanol molecule, and ethanol molecule is placed in external magnetic field of 1.4 Tesla. Then what do you expect when you place ethanol molecule in a 1.4 Tesla? And for your information, as we know, ethanol has 6 protons and 2 carbons and 1 oxygen, and carbon 12 is magnetically inactive and oxygen 16 is magnetically inactive. Only the proton, the hydrogen nucleus, is the magnetically active. So there are 6 magnetically active protons are there in ethanol molecule. So according to the Larmor frequency relation, then what do you expect? Well, from the discussion what we had till now, so since there are 6 protons are there in the ethanol molecule, and 6 protons will be resonating at 6 different places at a frequency of 60 megahertz along the applied field direction. This is what we normally answer when somebody asks you. But then in principle and in practical, this is not the case. All the protons do not precess at 60 megahertz along the applied field direction, but instead they resonate at different frequencies other than 60 megahertz. You may have the doubt what is the 60 megahertz. For your information, from the previous module discussions, you try to recall that the Larmor frequency, the frequency can be converted into the magnetic field, and magnetic field information can be converted into the corresponding frequency. So since we already started discussing that ethanol is placed in external magnetic field strength of 1.4 Tesla, this when you convert into the Larmor frequency, that comes around 60 megahertz. So that is why I said it is a 60 megahertz. So the point I want to make out here is that the protons in ethanol molecules do not precess at the applied field frequency. Let me generalize this point. So this I have explained with ethanol. So it in general, whatever the molecule that you may think of or that you are interested in measuring the chemical shift, this is generally happens. All the protons or any magnetically active nuclei do not precess at the same frequency which is equivalent to the applied field magnetic field, and the difference between the precessional frequency of a magnetically active nuclei with respect to applied magnetic field frequency is generally known as the chemical shift in NMR. And let us look at a few more details on this particular chemical shift. And this was initially observed by Packard in 1951 with regard to the ethanol molecule. What he noticed is that when he tried to record the chemical shift NMR spectrum of ethanol molecule, he has seen 3 different peaks in the spectrum. This is the ethanol spectrum which was recorded initially, and this later he realized that 3 different type of protons are actually corresponding to this OH proton, and then this methylene proton, and then methyl proton. That was the understanding later on, but initially they had no idea how this chemical shift actually arise. Of course, systematically it was standardized and it was studied. And for your information, I have a few more example to illustrate the point. When you take the toluene molecule, and in the toluene molecule you have 5 aromatic protons and then 3 aliphatic protons. So total you have 8 protons. And when you try to record the NMR spectrum of toluene, again the same situation. All these aromatic protons will resonate at one particular frequency. On the other hand, these methyl protons will be resonating at one particular frequency, and the intensity ratios when you take up, and it will be 3, and the other one is 5. Another example we have is para-hydroxy acetophenone. I have discussed earlier 2 proton NMR spectra, but it is not only the case for proton, but carbon 13 NMR. Carbon 13 is actually NMR active, so its NMR spectrum can be recorded. And when you try to record the carbon 13 nanomer of this particular para-hydroxyacetophenone, what you see is that different carbons are resonating at a different frequency. So all these things, if you look at further details, this was placed in a magnetic field frequency of 20 megahertz, but if you see, all these things are not resonating at that frequency. Instead, they are resonating at different positions, and these different positions are actually you may realize from the different position of the peak. So each peak in the NMR spectrum actually gives you the resonating frequency of a magnetically active nuclei. So in this particular case, it is a carbon NMR. Since it is a carbon NMR, it is a carbon peaks. Let me summarize what we have discussed till now. When you place a molecule that consists of magnetically active nuclei in an external magnetic field, all the magnetically active nuclei do not precess exactly at the applied magnetic field strength. Instead, they precess at different positions. Now, the difference between the Fresnel frequency of the magnetically active nuclei with respect to the applied magnetic field frequency is generally known as the chemical shift, and we shall discuss how this chemical shift actually came into the picture and what is the reason for observing the chemical shift and what is the origin for chemical shift we shall discuss. And without understanding the concept of chemical shift, it is very difficult for a student or any researcher to interpret the NMR data with its corresponding molecular structure. So let us spend a little more time on the chemical shift. So far we have discussed only about the magnetically active nuclei, and when you place magnetically active nuclei in the external magnetic field, which is very huge, how it behaves and all we have discussed. Then the question is, what happens to the counterpart of the nucleus? As we know that any given atom we have electrons and we have nucleus, and we have discussed nucleus influence, how it behaves when you place an external magnetic field is basically precise at the Larmor frequency. That's all we have discussed. But what happens to the electrons? So this is something that let me elaborate with a small pictorial diagram. We have nucleus, and then around the nucleus we have electrons. So these electrons, we know that they are actually moving. As they are moving around the nucleus, they will actually generate a secondary magnetic field. Why? Because according to the classical electromagnetism or electromagnetic theory, any charged particle, if it is in motion, it will basically generate a secondary magnetic field. Of course, you please remember, this secondary magnetic field will be very small as compared to the magnetic field that we apply in a NMR spectrometer. It is very huge. As compared to that, the secondary magnetic field generated by electrons in atoms and molecules, they are very small, but it is very significant. And in fact, these secondary magnetic field are primarily responsible for the observed chemical shift in NMR spectroscopy. How they are actually contributing to the NMR chemical shift, let us try to understand. Initially, we only consider only the nucleus. When you place it in external static magnetic field, it will precess at the Larmor frequency. That's all. But now I am saying that the electrons are there. So since electrons are there, naturally we will have a secondary magnetic field, and it will create a secondary magnetic field. That magnetic field has to be taken into the consideration. And normally there are two options are there. You have secondary magnetic field and you have the applied very huge primary magnetic field, and both these field can either oppose or they can actually align with respect to each other. It all depends upon the kind of molecule that we are actually trying to analyze. And normally most of the cases these magnetic field will be opposing each other, and only in few cases they will be aligning with each other. If they are opposing each other, just remember that I have a magnetic field, for example, it is pointing along this applied magnetic field, and this secondary magnetic field, you see that it is opposing. So therefore, normally what happens, even though you are keeping a particular nucleus at so and so 1.4 Tesla or 2 Tesla or 3 Tesla, it doesn't experience exactly that particular magnetic field. Why? Because there is a tiny magnetic field which is basically opposing. So therefore what happens, the nucleus basically it doesn't experience the total magnetic field as we have applied. So this is something what I call it as a shielding. The electrons around the nucleus will give the shielding, and as a result it will not experience the total magnetic field whatever that we have applied. This is what actually responsible for the NMR chemical shift. I hope that you are following. So we have electrons in atoms, and these electrons will generate a secondary magnetic field. They will normally oppose or they may align. In the case of align, then even in that case also it will not experience, the nucleus do not experience the correct magnetic field whatever you have applied, right? So it will experience something different than what it is supposed to be. So the nucleus is when you place an external magnetic field, it is shielded by the electrons around the nucleus, and as a result it will not precess at the actual magnetic field. Instead it will precess at different frequencies. So where exactly it precess, it all depends upon two things. Of course it is only one thing, that is nothing but it depends upon the electron density. So if you are focusing on a particular nucleus, around that particular nucleus, what is the electron density is actually primarily responsible for the chemical shift. Of course, electron density when you talk about, so when you look into the molecular structure, so if you have a number of in any given atom you will have different atoms, and then around the atoms you will have different electron densities. If you have different electron densities, then you will see different Fresnel frequencies. And suppose, let me take as an example, suppose if you have three different type of electron densities are there, then normally I would see three different type of NMR signals. And if you have four different type of electron densities are there, then normally we will have four different type of NMR signal in the NMR spectrometer. Well, having understood what is a secondary magnetic field, let us try to understand its mathematical description, and also let us try to understand how this secondary magnetic field is actually contributing to the Larmor frequency systematically. And the secondary magnetic field is very small, which is actually directly proportional to the applied field strength. And you know that in the mathematics that the proportionality constant normally we replace with some other constant. So here I replaced with sigma, and the negative sign which is present here actually represents that the secondary magnetic field which is generated by the motion of the electrons is basically opposing the static magnetic field. So that is what it is. Now since there is a secondary magnetic field generated locally, then naturally nuclei doesn't feel actual magnetic field B0, but instead it will feel something else. So therefore I change my notation to something else like this. So the B effective is nothing but the actual magnetic field experienced by the nuclei which is placed in a static magnetic field under the influence of, or if when you are considering the electron density. So now it is nothing but the B0 minus B local, right? It is very simple logic. But minus B local, actually I have defined something like this. So when you replace, B effective will be B0 multiplied by 1 minus sigma. And here for your information, let me point out what is sigma. Sigma is nothing but the shielding constant. I already mentioned about it. If you have a higher electron density around the nucleus, it will shield much more than a nucleus which is having less electron density. So it is basically it is shielding, right? The electron density around the nucleus is shielding the nucleus, actually applied the magnetic field. Therefore I call this quantity sigma as a shielding constant. Okay, so having modified or corrected, applied the effective magnetic field, then we will have to correct the Larmor frequency as well. Please remember that Larmor frequency originally it was defined as gamma mu L is equal to gamma B0 by 2 pi. But if you consider the electron contribution to the total magnetic field, then you will have to replace this B0 with B effective. So when you replace it, then this quantity will sit here. So therefore Larmor frequency originally, when you don't consider electron density, it will have only gamma B0 by 2 pi. But when you consider only the effective magnetic field, that means when you consider the electron density around the nucleus, obviously it will be modified, and as you can see, it will depends upon couple of other factors as well. Original Larmor frequency, it actually directly proportional to the applied field strength, and also it depends upon the gamma. Suppose if you are considering only one particular nucleus, then this gamma is constant, and then the static magnetic field is again a constant. What is not constant is the shielding constant. In a given molecule, you will have a different shielding constants, because around a particular nucleus, the electron density or electron cloud is different. If you have a different electron densities or electron clouds around a particular nuclei, accordingly you will have different frequencies. Suppose if you have a molecule like this, so you can see here the proton is situated in under different chemical environments. Here this proton, CH2 proton, what we call it as a methylene, and this CH protons, what we call it as a methine, and this is a NH proton, and this is a alkyl methyl proton. So the chemically proton is same, but since it is presented in a different chemical environments, so it will have different electron density around this particular proton nucleus. So therefore normally what we expect is different chemical shift for this particular proton, and this is methine and then methylene protons. To summarize all these things in a nutshell, electron density around a particular nucleus is primarily responsible for the chemical shift that we observe in NMR spectroscopy. Therefore, one has to look into the molecule and see before interpreting the molecular structure. In a given molecule, if you have n number of protons are there under n different chemical environments, even though they are chemically protons, but because they presented in a different under different chemical environments, so naturally they will induce a secondary magnetic field differently, and accordingly those many proton frequencies that we can observe in the NMR spectrum. This is the whole description about the origin of the chemical shift. I just pointed out the electron density around a particular nucleus is actually responsible for a different chemical shift that we observe, or different peaks that we observe in any NMR spectrum. Now, so this is another simplified version to understand the whole concept what I have discussed in the last two slides. Suppose if you have a particular nucleus, and then if you have placed in external magnetic field, and the strength of the magnetic field, static magnetic field, is represented with the arrow, and the height actually represent that much magnetic field, and I denoted with the V0. Now I am saying that because of the electron density or electron cloud around the magnetically active nucleus, we have the secondary magnetic field or local magnetic field. Therefore this local magnetic field, induced local magnetic field, is opposing, and so naturally the nucleus doesn't experience, even though you are applying this much magnetic field, the nucleus doesn't experience this B0 magnetic field. Instead it will experience only this much magnetic field, right, according to the mathematical description that we have done in the last slide. Okay, so the effective magnetic field is less because of the electron clouds. Therefore, it will resonate at a slightly different frequency than what it is supposed to be as per the Larmor frequency. Before going to the discussion of internal standards and reference materials used in NMR spectroscopy, let me remind you what you have already studied with regard to the shielding constants. The shielding constants are primarily responsible for observing different chemical shift values for different type of protons, and these shielding constants are primarily originated from the electron density. And to be precise, the total shielding constant experienced by a proton which is under investigation, it is actually the summation of three different parts. One is the local contribution. The local contribution mainly comes from the electron density around the particular nucleus which is being studied. The second one is neighboring group contribution. This contribution mainly comes from the neighboring atoms and the electron density around those atoms. The third one is solvent contribution. The solvent contribution mainly comes from certain type of solvent. When you are using certain type of solvent, especially the aromatic solvents, they contribute to some extent to the total shielding constant. And let me also remind you here, the measuring the shielding constant extremely difficult, because you have to calculate the electron densities around the all the atoms. As you know, measuring the electron density is extremely tedious task. However, to understand the chemical shift values, we need not to calculate the shielding constants. Instead, if you can understand what are the electron density from the electronegativities and all, then it is fairly easy to understand the chemical shift values. Well, having understood what is the reason for observing the chemical shift in NMR, let us try to understand what are the internal standards used in NMR spectroscopy. The internal standards are also called as a reference materials. As we learned from the previous discussion, when you place a magnetically active nuclei in the external magnetic field, they will be precessing at different frequencies other than the frequency which is equivalent to the applied magnetic field. So one can measure the absolute precessional frequencies of the nuclei. However, it is not necessary to measure the absolute field frequency. In principle and in practice, what is generally it is done is that the precessional frequencies of a group of nuclei will be measured with respect to a standard or reference. In NMR spectroscopy, tetramethylselene is generally used as a internal standard, and it is well known as TMS. As you know, silane is a SiH4, and the 4 hydrogens of a simple silane, if you can replace with the 4-methyl group, then you will be getting the tetramethylsilane. Now the question is, why we use tetramethylsilane as an internal standard? There are few reasons for using this particular TMS as an internal standard. The one reason is that the tetramethylsilane is soluble in most of the organic solvents. Why we have to talk about organic solvents? As you know that if you want to record a NMR spectrum in a solution phase, then definitely you have to dissolve your compound in some solvent, right? And if you want TMS to be used as a internal standard, then definitely this has to have the better solubility. So therefore one has to look into this aspect, and in that respect TMS has a good solubility, so this is really advantageous. Another reason for using TMS as an internal standard is that it will not react with most of the organic compounds. Chemically it is basically inert. So this is something really useful while doing the experiment. Another reason is that it is volatile. That means its boiling point is very small, and you can easily evaporate after the measurement, and then you can extract compound easily. Another reason is that, as you can see, silane is having 4 methyl group, and each methyl group is having 3 protons. So it has got totally 12 equivalent protons, and when you are recording the carbon, then 4 equivalent carbons are there. So this is really good, because after all the intensity of a NMR signal is generally depend upon how many magnetically active nuclei are present, right? Since you have a 12 equivalent protons, it will give very intense signal in the NMR spectrum at the extreme right side. Then it is easy to locate. Since its signal intensity is high, it is easy to locate, and then you can interpret the data. Similarly, when you are recording the carbon NMR spectrum, it has got 4 carbons, and 4 carbons are again equivalent. So this will also give reasonably very good signal, and easy to locate that particular signal and to interpret the NMR spectrum of unknown compound. Just after recording the proton NMR spectrum of an unknown compound using the TMS, we will observe a very intense proton signal due to the presence of 12 protons of the TMS on the extreme right hand side, and that particular signal will be set to 0. Accordingly, the other proton signals will be rearranged, and we will measure the chemical shift values. Suppose if you have measured the 13 carbon NMR spectrum, in that case also we will see a intense signal due to the presence of 4 carbon atoms on the extreme right hand side. That particular signal also will be fixed to 0, and accordingly the other carbon signals will be automatically rearranged, and then we will measure the chemical shift values. Well, what if the internal standard TMS do not soluble in the NMR solvent? Let's say TMS do not soluble in water and it's a deuterated form D2O. So therefore we cannot use TMS as the internal standard to carry out the experiment in water or deuterated water. In such cases we will be using generally this kind of compound. This is known as the sodium salt of trimethylsilyl propane sulfonic acid. This is extremely useful as an internal standard in the water and deuterated water. There are several internal standards or reference materials are available commercially to record the NMR spectrum of unknown compounds. What kind of internal standard or reference material that you have to take, it all depends upon what kind of nuclei that you are really interested in. As I just mentioned, for proton, TMS is extremely good and it will serve as an internal standard. Similarly, for 13 carbon, again tetramethylselene is a good internal standard. And to record the 19 fluoride NMR spectrum, we use CFCl3. And to record the 13 phosphorus NMR spectrum, we use a concentrated orthophosphoric acid. And to record the 15 nitrogen nuclei, we use liquid ammonia. Of course, as you know that the liquid ammonia is highly volatile. In generally, we don't use liquid ammonia as a internal standard. We use a nitromethane as an internal standard. On the other hand, if you want to record the NMR spectrum of a 17 oxygen, we will go for water as the internal standard. Therefore, the choice of internal standards depends upon the type of analysis that we would like to carry out. For different magnetically active nuclei, we have different internal standards. If you would like to carry out simple proton and carbon 13 NMR spectrum of unknown compound, you can go ahead with the tetramethylsilane TMS. And most of these references or internal standards, they come along with the NMR solvents. The best example is deuterated chloroform. The commercially available deuterated chloroform will have 0.01 percentage to 1% of tetramethylsilane. Therefore, that particular solvent, readily you can use it for recording the NMR spectrum of your unknown compounds. Having understood what are the internal standards used in NMR spectroscopy to measure the NMR spectrum and its chemical shift values, let us concentrate on what are the solvents used in NMR. First of all, what are the solvents available for us? If you take ethanol, methanol, water, butanol, propanol, acetone, benzene. So these are some of the solvents that we have. Whether we can use all these solvents as such to record the NMR spectrum? Yes, the answer is no, because as you can see, most of these commonly used solvents will have proton content. Similarly, they are also having carbon content. As we know, the proton is magnetically active and 13 carbon is magnetically active. When you try to record the NMR spectrum of unknown compound, since these nuclei already magnetically active and the NMR signals of our unknown compound, protons and carbons, will be interfering with the solvent proton and carbon signals. Therefore, we need to have a solvent such that it will not interfere with the NMR spectral signals of our unknown compound. If we stick our discussion to the proton NMR spectroscopy of a unknown compound, first of all we have to choose a solvent which does not have a proton, because if a proton is there, its signal will be interfered with the proton NMR signal of our compound. Therefore, we have to choose a solvent which does not have a proton. And if you look at the chemical catalog, we will find very limited choices, like carbon tetrachloride is one example where it doesn't have any proton. Similarly, we have another solvent like carbon disulfide, it doesn't have any proton. However, these type of solvents cannot be used. These are not called as a general solvents. Of course, they are solvent, but they are not called as a general solvents to carry out the routine experiments, mainly because of the solubility issues. On the other hand, uh, the commercially available solvents as such we cannot use because they are having proton. Therefore, instead of using the commercially available solvents in the NMR spectroscopy as such, what is generally done, we use a deuterated solvents. For example, if you have a chloroform CHCl3, you have a proton. That proton will be knocked out. The proton will be knocked out with the deuterium atom. Then we will have a deuterated chloroform. So such a solvent will be used as a NMR solvent to record the NMR spectrum of a proton. Of course, it can be used for carbon-13 as well. The process of converting a solvent protons into its deuterated form is known as deuteration. Usually, the deuteration process doesn't take place with 100% efficiency. As a result, we will have a significant amount of residual protons will be present in any given deuterated solvent. Therefore, it will give you very prominent NMR signal. Let us look at the example of solvent chloroform. The chloroform solvent can be converted into its deuterated form, what we call it as a deuterated chloroform, which is also known as chloroform D. That means upon deuteration, CHCl3 becomes CdCl3. However, 100% deuteration of chloroform is not possible without converting into CdCl3 even after the completion of deuteration process. This CHCl3, what we call it as a residual solvent molecules, they will give you residual proton, and this residual proton will give you a residual NMR spectrum if you are using such a deuterated chloroform solvent. To be precise, invariably the deuterated chloroform will give you very strong intense singlet signal at 7.26 ppm. Similarly, the methanol solvent, because of the incomplete deuteration, it will give very strong signal at 3.31 ppm. If we summarize what we have discussed under this NMR solvents, we have to use deuterated solvents to avoid the spectral interference for recording the proton NMR spectrum or the carbon-13 NMR spectrum. And when you are using the deuterated solvents, and we will be getting a very strong intense solvent peak due to the residual protons, which is arised because of the incomplete deuteration process. Let me ask you a very basic question. What is the nuclear spin of deuterium atom? If you look at the standard tables, we will come to know that the deuterium atom is having nuclear spin of 1. That means it is magnetically active. That means when you place it in the external magnetic field, it will precess. That means it will give NMR signals. Therefore, don't you think that this usage of deuterated solvent will create an interference with the NMR signals of our compound? Yes, my logic is very valid logic. Since my deuterium, which is present in the solvent, is magnetically active, I would anticipate that its NMR signal will be interfered with the proton NMR signals or carbon-13 NMR signals of my compound. However, this is not the case. The deuterium atom is magnetically active, there is no doubt. However, its NMR signals will be out of the window. To be precise, in the case of proton, our spectral window is between -4 to 20 ppm, and in the case of 13 carbon NMR, it is roughly between 0 to 250 ppm. However, if you look at the resonating signals that are arise due to the deuterium, they will be out of this window. So therefore, even though it is magnetically active and even though it is resonating, these signals will not interfere with the NMR signals that we are studying. Deuterium lock is the another advantage with the deuterated solvents. What is deuterium lock? Deuterium lock is nothing but the lock in the magnetic field fluctuations in a NMR spectrometer. But why magnetic field fluctuations are observed in a spectrometer? Well, you may recall that we are using very huge magnetic field in the NMR spectrometer, and this magnetic field over a period of time it can undergo little bit of fluctuations. Another reason is that the electrical circuit which are used in the NMR spectrometer can lead to little bit of fluctuations. Therefore, these magnetic field fluctuations that we observe in the NMR spectrometer are unwanted, and these have to be fixed. Otherwise, we will see different chemical shift values for the same compound. To fix these magnetic field fluctuations, we need a signal, and this signal generally comes from the deuterium NMR signal, which is totally present in the out of the window. Of course, we cannot use our compound NMR signal, because if you fix it, then you cannot see any NMR signals. I want to share one latest information with regard to the NMR solvents and internal standards. We previously discussed that the internal standard will be placed in the NMR solvent, in which our compound will be placed or dissolved, and then we will record the NMR spectrum. So this is a convention that we follow. But the latest NMR measurements, we don't use any internal standard or reference material. Well, if you don't use the internal standard, then how do we calibrate the NMR spectrum that we observe? Well, to calibrate the NMR spectrum, nowadays we use the deuterated or residual proton signal. You may just recall, in the case of deuterated chloroform, we will observe a residual proton signal at 7.26 ppm. Similarly, in the case of methanol, residual proton signal will be observed at 3.31 ppm. So these signals will be utilized to correct the position of the spectral NMR signals. Well, this is the right time for me to introduce the units of chemical shift in NMR spectroscopy, for which let me take the example of ethanol molecule, and this is the ethanol molecule NMR spectrum. Ethanol consists of 6 protons, and these 6 protons are arranged into 3 different type of protons. As you can see here, the proton which is present here has different electron density, and this proton, methylene proton, has different electron density, and this methyl proton has different electron density. As a result, what we observe is that the shielding constants are different. Since the shielding constants are different, each proton will resonate at different positions. That is the reason why we see 3 different sets of proton NMR signals in the NMR spectrum of ethanol, and the resonance frequencies of these 3 protons are measured with respect to the standard TMS signal. As you can see from here, the resonating frequencies can be calculated using this formula: nu p is equal to gamma b0 into 1 minus sigma divided by 2 pi, where sigma stands for the shielding constants. If you have n number of protons with different shielding constant, accordingly you will observe n different resonating signals in the NMR spectrum. Therefore, it is not surprising that ethanol is giving 3 different NMR signals, because it has 3 different type of shielding constants. Measuring the chemical shift values is very straightforward. So this difference is the chemical shift value of methyl proton, and this difference is the chemical shift value of methylene, and this difference is the chemical shift value of OH proton. At this juncture, let me ask you very basic question: what will happen to the chemical shift values of ethanol if I record in 2 different NMR spectrometers? What I mean is that, suppose I have ethanol molecule, and if I record its NMR spectrum in 100 MHz spectrometer and also 200 MHz NMR spectrometer. So what will happen to these chemical shift values? Well, we need not to break our head to answer this question. Just look at the Larmor frequency equation, which is modified with the shielding constants. As you can see here, nu p stands for the proton resonating frequency, which is directly proportional to the applied field strength, and gamma is constant. Since we have only confined our discussion to the proton, therefore this is constant. Since nu p is directly proportional to the applied field strength, then naturally we expect, in the case of 200 MHz NMR spectrometer, the ethanol chemical shift values will be higher as compared to the 100 MHz NMR spectrometer, which means ethanol is giving different chemical shift values for the same proton depending upon the type of instrument that is being used to record the NMR spectral data. This is really nonsense. How come the same molecule will give different chemical shift values depending upon the instrument that we use? So if you want to make a correlation, it is really difficult to make a correlation. Therefore, over a period of time, it was realized that reporting chemical shift values as such is not a convenient way to understand and interpret the structure of a unknown compound. Another major issue is that the measured chemical shift values of a magnetically active nuclei or the resonating frequencies of magnetically active nuclei are found to be extremely small irrespective of the NMR spectrometer that is being used for recording the data. How much small? Yes, they are found to be of the order of few hertz out of megahertz. Therefore, instrumentation point of view, it is very difficult to measure such a small quantities. In order to address these two problems, what are those? One is the chemical shift value is keep on changing with respect to the applied field strength. Another problem is that the measured chemical shift values are extremely small. In order to account these two problems, the chemical shift scale has been introduced, and the chemical shift generally measured in delta scale, and this scale is very simple. As we have seen, the chemical shift is basically keep on increasing with respect to the applied field strength. Therefore, it was thought that the variation in chemical shift value can be normalized by dividing with respect to the applied field strength. Another problem, that is nothing but the small chemical shift values are taken care by multiplying this quantity with 10 raised to 6, that is nothing but it is a 1 million, and this formula is extremely useful to understand the chemical shift trends. As you can see here, the chemical shift in ppm do not change with respect to the applied field strength. Why? Because there is a numerator, and this numerator is nothing but the applied field strength. So it is normalized. Since it is normalized, this will be constant. That means the ethanol molecule, even if you record in a different NMR spectrometer, it will give the same NMR spectral data. It doesn't change. What will change is that with respect to different NMR instrument, the chemical shift values changes, but not the chemical shift in ppm. I want to make it very clear. Chemical shift is different from the chemical shift in ppm. The chemical shift changes with respect to the applied field strength, and the chemical shift in ppm do not change with respect to the applied field strength.